Page 8 of function. So once again, we're going to look at these mapping diagrams, but now we're going to go backwards. Function f that maps a onto b will have an inverse that maps f inverse. This notation looks like an exponent of negative, but it just means inverse function, okay? Maps b onto a. If f of equals y, then f inverse of y equals x. Makes sense, right? One of them goes to y and the other one goes from y to x. What does that look like in terms of a function map? It, instead of arrows going from the right, they just reverse the arrowheads and they go from the right to the left, but they go exactly between the same numbers. And then calling it the function f, they call it the function f inverse because it does the opposite of what's, okay? And that only with one functions. Remember, there's many-to-one functions, one-to-many functions, one-to-one. Inverse function can be created from their one-to-one. Okay? All right. So here, f is a function from a to b. The inverse function, f inverse, is a function that makes the element of b onto its corresponding element from a. For example, f of 1 is 6. That's the forward. F inverse x equals 1. That's the backwards direction. Okay. Number 2, state which functions has an inverse, giving a case. Now, how do we know that it has an inverse? Is it a one-to-one function? So what were the conditions to be function? It could be 1, or it could be to 1. This couldn't be one to many, right? If it was going to be function. But in this case, we're looking specifically for functions that have inverse. Functions that inverse. So this is being even more strict. And now we're looking just one-to-one functions. So the reason we're going to give is that it's one-to-one. That's what can be, I can have an inverse. Okay. A. So we can see that this is a many-to-one function, right? Because we have both -2 going to 4. We have both -1 and 1-to-1. So this is a many-to-one function. Many-to-one. So it is not a function. Does not have no inverse because it is many-to-one, okay? All right, if it 1-to-1, then it would have an inverse. Okay, let's look at B. B, it looks 1, right? 1-to-1, 1-to-1, 1-to-1 to 1-to-1. Okay, so that is a function. That has an inverse. This is a 1-to-1 function, has an inverse. Okay, let's look at See, it's a little bit harder because it's not a drawing. The function is defined x plus 1. See, so it maps the set A from -2, -1, 0, 1, 2 to a set in B. The easiest way to look at this is to like actually map out the set. So -2 plus is -1. So negative goes to -1. -1 plus 1 is -1 maps, or -1 maps to 0. And 0 plus 1 is 1, so 0 maps, and 1 maps to 2. Now we can see the pattern, so we don't need to do plus 1 every time. So the is definitely one mapping, so it has an inverse, right? Okay. So here the is 1 plus x squared, and it's going to map -1, 0, 2 to some numbers in set. Let's see what numbers are. So -1 squared is +1. 1 is 2. And for those of you who are doing that on the calculator, careful. Whenever you replace the x, remember that you should always replace the x with a parenthesis around replacing it with. So 1 plus, and when I put -1 into x, I'm going to put parentheses -1. Parentheses square, and when I do that it becomes 2. If I put the parentheses there and I did like 1 minus 1 squared, oops, 1 minus 1 squared, oh drat it, finally. Okay, you see the result? You need to put parentheses around the thing before you put in the x. So when you put negative in there, you get 2. When you 0 in there, you get 1 plus 0, which is 1. When you 1 in there, you get 1 plus squared, which is also 2. You put 2 in there, you get 1 plus squared, which is 5. You could put all those in the calculator if you want to. 1, 2, 5. Ooh, looks like we have a case where two different numbers map 2, which is known as 1. So this is a many-to-one function. And if it's 1, there is no inverse. Okay? You can kind of see why that is, right? Because like if you, let's say that you're over here and you go backwards and you want to define your inverse function so those back to where it came from. Well, once you're at 4, you don't know if it came from -2 or 2. You can't inverse to the origin because there's two origins and you don't know where it came from, okay? So that is the reason why you can't have the inverse function. Number 3, the diagram shows f. Let's see, it looks like it's 1 to 1, right? Yeah, it's 1 to 1. Now, what are they going to ask us? Explain inverse exists because it's 1 to 1. Okay, 1 because it's 1 to 1. Write down of f of 1. Now, remember, 1 here is the x value. When they say f of 1, they're saying what has the value of the x value 1 after it goes through the mapping f. Starts out here is 1. Where does it map to? 1. Okay, what about f of 2? Starts here, maps to 5. F inverse 0. Now, this doesn't say f of 0, f inverse of 0, which means start with the y value to go back to the x value. Here you got f inverse. Again, you start with the y value, go back to the x value. So like people write this, right? Y equals f of x, or f of x equals y, okay? So this is starting from the going to the set B. If you put f inverse, normally what you write is you put y inside the parentheses, and then you put the parentheses, because saying that you're starting with the y value and you're going back to the x value. Now, what's really confusing is a lot of it's written like this, and then people think that the x goes in the inside, but in this particular case, it just means the input to the input. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the set A, okay? So remember, what goes in the parentheses for the f inverse is actually the y's, even if it's there, okay? Okay, construct a diagram for f inverse. All right. Mapping diagram. The only thing that we're going to do different, we're going to make a replica of what they have right there. So we're going to have 1, 3, -3 for A, and then we're going to have a set B where we have 1, 0, 5, 2. We have all these arrows. We're going to draw them exactly as they are. The only difference, the lines in the function go from left to right. The lines in the f inverse function go from right to left, and that's the only difference. Okay, there's the mapping diagram. We're done. That's our video.